All right, we are live. This is an impromptu stream, but as CJDV, shout out Chris, knows, we've been streaming live on just the experiment here on Twitch and Twitter, as well as Facebook for the last hour and a half. And this is the experiment. It's actually quite awesome that you can see the large amounts of bubbles but these bubbles streaming up off of it, and that it's actually a sealed jar. There's no electricity going in at all to this little reactor that I have set up, and it is continuously producing a large amount of hydrogen and electrolysis and just energy within it all. Good morning. Bless you all who are here tuning in. We got 11 of you already. And Billy the Kid, shout out. S, Just Frank, and of course, CJDV, Brother Chris. All right, so what we're going to be doing today is playing, well, the other day, we played the amazing Nassim Haramein's Cognos 2010 or 2012, 2010, I think, presentation that's absolutely epic. And it's reminded me of Dan Winter's 2013 Implosion in New Technologies Cognos 2013 presentation. And it actually changed my life. I've probably watched this at least 20 times, if not more. Every time I watch it, I gain something new from it. And the stories that he actually starts out with the bonfire, the plasma flaming mind, and the Navajo, as well as the plasma flame worm out of Calgary, Alberta Institute in the Don Po of Tibet. It's quite the story. And then from that, it goes straight into monoatomics, cold fusion, different stuff. And yeah, that's how we're going. And welcome. Let's get it playing.
That depends on you or not somebody else. Because in this there is no teacher, no pupil, there's no leader, there's no guru, there's no master, no savior. You yourself are the teacher and the pupil, you are the master, you are the guru, you are the leader. You are everything. And to understand is to transform what is. To understand is
It's wonderful to feel so much appreciated and loved when we come here. Thank you to the Spanish heart. Thank you to the spirit and gentleness that is the Spanish culture. It's a beautiful thing. So the title of today's lecture is called The Flame in the Mind. The Flame in the Mind. The concept here is that if we understand how you make a fire, how you make a flame with your mind, that we will also understand the solution to zero-point energy, free energy, implosion energy, and fusion. So if we understand how you make a fire with your mind, if we really understand the physics of consciousness, the flame in the mind, we'll understand the solution to our energy crisis, the solution to fusion, the solution to plasma. So to begin, I want to tell a little story. I used to be privileged to be invited to speak at the Cherokee Shaman conferences in Sunray Meditation Society in Vermont, sponsored by the famous Dahani Wahu, who was a very famous Cherokee grandmother and shaman. And actually, I feel her energy as I speak her name. And one day I was doing a lecture there, and this is just incidental, but we were teaching about some origins of the alphabet work. And you know how we've taught for years about how alphabet letters make a flame in your mind. We'll play the animations later. But I was showing the Hani Wahu, the Cherokee, the Native American, I was showing them the sacred letters of the Ophanim Enochian here, the angel alphabet, Ophanim. Many of you have seen this. And she said, oh, that's the sacred alphabet of our star elder ancestors, the Adawi. And so she recognized this alphabet as the origin of Cherokee from the pure geometry of sacred alphabets. And it was fun, it's fascinating. But that's not the story I want to tell right now. The story I want to tell you right now is what happened next. They had constructed a circle of trees for what they called the Cherokee Sacred Council of Elders. They called it the Arboretum. And the young Cherokee shaman who for that year had been in training to become initiated and honored as a shaman in the Cherokee culture. And they had to prove that they had learned. And one of the things they had to do is they set this little brush in front of them, and they would sit there and focus. And if they could light the fire with their mind, then they were initiated. That was their test. And we watched. Now, there's another culture that does something very similar. Has anyone ever heard the English term, the Bon Po? You know, the Bon Po master of Tibet? Well, in English, we have a term for a fire. It's called the bonfire. Do you know where the term bonfire comes from? It comes from the Tibetan Bon Po. And what do the Tibetan Bon Po do? They light a flame, a fire with their mind. It's called the bonfire. Now, when the Tibetan Bon Po, when they light the flame, they have a massive ritual. We learned about this in Calgary with a wonderful sponsor of our lectures there, Terry Willard, Wild Rose College in Calgary, Canada. And they invite the Tibetan Bon Po there, and they come and they do this massive ritual. They would bring a truckload of sacred herbs, and they would pour them into this giant bonfire. And the bonfire would be lit, and it would be midwinter, and this fire would go like hundreds of feet into the sky. It was a huge flame that would burn for days. And that flame on the land in a very special place would accomplish incredible healing. Incredible healing. Now, I mean, there were stories told there in Calgary, this giant ancient dragon current, and there were people that claimed to see the dragon come out of the land, and we now know what that is. That's a plasma worm. That's a charged envelope. Yes, it's a living being. Yes, it's an elemental. And yes, it's living charged plasma. And how did it get there? It was attracted. It was attracted to the flame. Now I want to tell you another story. There is a partner and friend of ours in Budapest. His name is George Edgley. And he is rather famous for carbon powder plasma fusion. And he claims that indeed he has a net energy gain when you have fusion in carbon powder. You know, Rossi and Defcalion, they're doing fusion with nickel powder. Well, Edgley is doing fusion with carbon powder. Now, interestingly, Dr. Edgley claims that the part of the carbon powder in the flame, and by the way, he doesn't have $1 billion government budget. He uses a $100 microwave oven, actually. And he puts the carbon powder in there, and at a certain pressure and temperature, there is plasma. And the plasma does fusion. And he claims there's a net energy gain during fusion. Now, this is the holy grail of science, the holy grail of physics. Is it in fact possible to gain energy during fusion? You know what gaining energy during fusion would be? That is, in some way that you gain energy during collapse, during compression, during implosion. Non-destructive compression, implosion, fusion, and gaining energy during collapse. These are all terms for the same thing. Now, Dr. Edgley claims that the part of the carbon powder that does the fusion is what he calls a carbon nanotube. You know what a carbon nanotube is? It's like a helix of single carbon atoms. But you know what carbon nanotubes are famous for? The geometry of a carbon nanotube is called a fullerene, as in Buckminster Fuller. And Buckminster Fuller was actually a good friend of mine. In fact, I have to say that I learned personally from Bucky Fuller this, from the what he called the vector flexor. This would be an example of non-destructive collapse. Cube octa, ecosa. Actually, there's a dodeca in there, octa. So this is called the jitterbug, as it was properly called by Bucky. And he taught me that personally. And it further collapses, as you know, into the tetra. So you had cube octa, ecosa, dodeca, octa, and tetra. All part of one implosive collapse. Anyway, years later, when science discovered what single carbon atoms, how they like to unpack or nest, they named that structure Buckminster Fullerene after my friend Bucky Fuller, the inventor of the geodesic dome and the Dymaxion car. And they named it Buckminster Fullerene because it looked like this. A geodesic dome, actually a stellation of dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, ecosa. We call this the Star Mother kit. It's available here. And Dr. Edgley claims that the part of the carbon that does fusion is this part. So what is it about this geometry that enables fusion, implosion, the perfect plasma flame? Well, the fun part well, first of all, Dr. Edgley now with our team we're doing the calorimetry with one of the world's leading plasma fusion experts, actually, and we're going to prove, you know, this science is advancing quickly in the field of fusion energy. But I want to tell you about the spiritual lesson here. This to me I won't say it's more exciting than the physics, but this is the climax of the physics, is the spiritual lesson. And let me tell you what's most exciting then about the carbon powder fusion, which is, here's Edgley in his lab, and he's got these little glass balls, and inside it there's this glowing plasma of carbon fusing. And it's claimed that atomic transmutation, alchemy, real alchemy, is happening. You know, the term alchemy comes from alchem. Chem, K-H-E-M, was the original name for Egypt because it meant from the place of the blue-black blood. Blue-black blood. Enki's blood, Hermes. They were the black pharaohs. And it came to mean from the place of the bucanero, the black hole. So chem, as in alchemy and chemistry, transliterated means access to the place of the black hole. Literally, ability to make a black hole is how you transliterate the word chem, as in chemistry, alchemy. And when the early biblical scholars in the Bible, when they said, I will raise a Shem, a chem, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord, that word Shem, which became our word Shem'an, a shaman, as in a Cherokee shaman, a Shem'an. In the Bible, the word Shem, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. When you now read the Bible, that is your word, the altar in the church. So an altar in a church is actually a Shem. Now Zechariah Sitchin, he studied this term, Shem, from Sumerian for years. And finally he decided to translate the word Shem to mean highward fire stone. A firestone that goes into the sky. Literally a flame. So some kind of stone that makes plasma into a flame is the definition of altar in the church. Now you know that if you put the stones in Stonehenge in the right geometry, it creates a flame of electric charge that dramatically causes seeds to germinate better and faster. So this is some kind of flame also, isn't it? It's a plasma flame. Now, the fun part of what Dr. Edgley is doing, and you can see pictures at greentechinfo.eu, greentech, T-E-C-H, info.eu. Dr. Edgley in Budapest, carbon powder plasma fusion. Here's the fun part. This is what I'm challenging you scientists here with me today. I'm challenging you to explain this to me. Dr. Edgley is quite sure that when he has this plasma flame going, that anybody nearby that has a cold or an infection or is sick is healed. Oh yeah, this plasma fusion is absolutely, measurably a bioactive field, a healing field. You get plasma fusion going correctly, the opposite of fission, and suddenly everyone nearby is healed. Hello? Ask him, it's real. It's serious science. So now here we are, serious scientists. We need to know what it is about that kind of plasma flame that causes healing. Here are some clues. There's a famous French scientist named Priory who used what's called a phase conjugate dielectric field, the Priory device, P-R-I-O-R-E. Priory, very famous. Tom Bearden wrote about it extensively. Bill may mention it after me. But the Priory device was implosive plasma, phase conjugate optics and dielectrics, phase conjugate optics and dielectrics, a flame. And in there, the French government documented in that field, thousands of cases of cancer were healed, documented by the government. Elizabeth Rauscher took the same frequencies, which are called phase conjugate, for magnets, and did an FDA study, showed dramatic pain reduction inside the compression flame, the compression field. The same frequencies, phase conjugate magnetics. We can show you the equation for those frequencies later. It's called phase conjugate magnetics. Now, I don't want to get into the really fancy physics right away. I want us to really grok the meaning of this, the implication of this. And so I want to really get to this issue of how you make a flame with your mind, because if you knew how, you would be steering tornadoes, you would be making plasma fusion energies, you would be a sun god, you know? You'd be the Holy Grail, right? So I'm asking you and me today if we can learn how to make a flame with our mind. And I'm asking you as an electric engineer. You know that for many years, my partner Valerie and I have been traveling the world, and I pioneered a technology called the Bliss Tuner. Bliss Tuner. And with the Bliss Tuner, we were able to measure. This is a lady in Australia having a bliss experience. And just at this moment right here, she's going, ah, ah, ah. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harmonics in her brain waves precisely at golden mean ratio. There's been a lot of discussion here in this conference already about golden mean ratio. Well, I pioneered the measurement of golden mean ratio in brain waves. This is on the right is your right hemisphere. On the left is the left hemisphere. This is the delta, theta. This is the alpha in the brain waves. This is alpha at around 8.5 hertz there. And you see, when these lines line up here, the computer is telling us that she has achieved golden mean ratio between the frequency of the alpha, which is here, and the frequency of the beta, which is here. There it is. In fact, maybe I'll just pause that for a moment. Yeah, so from here at 8.5 hertz to here at just under 14 hertz, the ratio between the frequencies of the alpha and the beta, is golden mean. Now, so this led me to hypothesize that golden mean ratio in brain waves correlated to peak perception, bliss, euphoria, ecstasy. And others before me had worked in that direction. My good friend, Professor Konstantin Korotkov in Russia, did a lot of work in that area. So we came up with a model of what is peak perception, golden mean ratio in EEG. And it kind of looks like this. This is what your brain waves are doing. Your brain waves are making these harmonics called a caduceus, which in physics is called conjugating phases. Conjugate means to add and multiply recursively, which is exactly what only golden mean ratio allows. So you get these two, we call it two pine cones kissing noses. Did I put that animation in here? When two pine cones kiss noses, oh, here we have the pine cones kissing noses. Here's the two pine cones right here on the bottom right. Right there. You see the two pine cones right there? The two purple pine cones right there. Now, your brain waves are making those harmonics, and the point between where they cross, right at the center, is where you make a flame in your mind. You're creating compression. It's called a phase conjugate model of compression. You know, when you have Kundalini, you feel this intense burning fire in your pineal gland. I've been there for 30 years, so I kind of know what that is. And we now know where that flame in your mind comes from. It's called a phase conjugate model of perception. Now, as I began teaching this, I met another scientist who was also teaching that perception is caused by phase conjugation, the caduceus, recursive adding and multiplying. His name is Stephen Lehar. And he said, yes, it's true that the way when you see a gestalt, a whole image, the way you auto-determine the boundary conditions, that you self-organize your relationship to the whole, the only way to explain that, he says, is a phase conjugate model of perception. Now, here's another clue. I'm going to give you a few more clues, and then we're going to try to answer the puzzle. Here's the next clue. The clue to what makes a flame in the mind. Here's the next clue. The fact that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. It's well documented and it's measurable. This is the book, it's called Conscious Acts of Creation, by one of the most famous physicists, a good friend at the time is Bill Tiller, Stanford University. And he showed dozens of examples that when people focus their attention, it causes electric fields to compress. It causes compression, implosion. Basically, charge is concentrated in the presence of focused human attention. So electrically, we know for sure that when you're about making a flame in your mind, it causes the electric field around you to compress. Now, Bill Tiller never explained how that happens. Our job today is to do that. Now I'm going to give you another clue. There's another famous person. His name is Ingo Swann. My friend Bill Donovan, who's speaking after me today, helped me understand this. I'd like to acknowledge Bill for this part of it. Bill pointed out that when they found out that Ingo Swann, he was a famous psychic, you might have heard of him. He did remote viewing to the backside of the moon and discovered there's some astral parasites there, very messy. But Ingo Swann was famous that when he used his focused attention, call it psychokinesis, that it would restore damaged trypsin enzymes, life. So he could create life with his attention. We can understand how now because the enzymes were restored to life by his attention for the same reason that seeds germinate faster in a compression field like Stonehenge. Very measurable. So the physicists, the scientists, and the link to this conversation, the web link to this conversation, are in the web link which is dedicated to this lecture today. That's the link where all of the material from today's lecture is located, fractalfield.com/conjugate mind. The mind that conjugates together stays together. I mean, the family that lives together loves together. So, what is a conjugate mind? So, it turns out that the scientists decided to review Ingo Swann's ability to make a flame with his mind. And they put a thermistor that was sensing temperature at a distance. Now, by the way, if you want to do what the tokamak and all the fusion projects are trying to do but failed, all you have to do is control heat at a distance. If you can control heat at a distance, for example, through a metal container, you are the answer to plasma fusion. It's called plasma containment. It's the biggest problem out there. Ask Nassim. He talks about it all the time. Didn't figure out the answer, but he knows the question. So, to be able to control the heat at a distance means you have control of fusion. So they did some studies with Ingo Swann because he seemed to be able to control heat at a distance. So here's a thermistor. Instead of a flame, it's a temperature sensor. And they put it at a distance, and sure enough, he focuses, and the thermistor starts to get hot. Flame with your mind. So they said, we got to figure out how he's doing that. So they put a metal screen between Ingo Swann and the thermistor, and they grounded that metal screen. Now, if you're an electrical engineer like Bill, you know that no electromagnetic normal frequency, no radio waves, no microwave, nothing is going to get through a metal screen that's grounded. Nothing. Guess what? Consistently, through the grounded metal screen, Ingo Swann could radiate his focus, that thermistor, make a flame with his mind at a distance through the screen. That means that he was using some kind of wave that can go through anything. Does that sound like God to you? Does that sound like the spiritual literature about the Holy Ghost? Hello? Well, it turns out that there is one kind of wave in physics that can go through just about anything. It's called a longitudinal wave. I'll show you a picture. So, what we're saying in this lecture is that the solution to naturally centripetal wave nature of mind and consciousness is also the implosive solution to zero-point energy and fusion. The perfect flame is a fire that does not consume. If you ever studied the priests of Atlantis and their Troy stone, their fire crystal in Atlantis, they called it the flame that does not consume. You know what perfect compression, perfect fractal implosion is? It's called non-destructive compression because it does not consume. It's a flame without heat. It's a cool fire. That would be a good bumper sticker on your way to a rock concert or a rave, wouldn't it? The cool flame. So, science has a name for that. It's called phase conjugate dielectrics and optics. It's self-organizing. It's naturally centripetal, and it is plasma containment. So, what kind of wave can do that? Well, they're basically, well, there's more than two, but we're going to talk about two kinds of waves in physics here. And again, thanks to Bill Donovan on this stuff. So, most of your electromagnetic signatures are a wave that looks like this. It's called a transverse wave. Oops. Whereas on the bottom, this is another kind of wave. It's called a longitudinal wave. See, transverse waves go like this. That's transverse. Longitudinal waves go like this. That's longitudinal. Longitudinal waves, like sound waves, can go through almost anything, including the metal screen. So, here is an animation of what it would look like inside your brain. This is your right hemisphere of your brain, and this is the left hemisphere of your brain. And here are two longitudinal waves here. They're compression waves like this, okay? Now, if your brain learns how to do this, like Ingo Swann did, then you can light a flame with your mind. Now, it's interesting that there's a simple way to prove this. Very simple. All we have to do is, when we're measuring the golden ratio in EEG here, all we have to do is prove that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere are exactly 180 degrees out of phase. So one's going up, one's going down, like this. It's called phase discipline or phase ratio, 180 out of phase, like dancing. So that would mean if we measured it and if we proved it, that at this point, you can kind of see it here. Let me see if I can get this up here again. See if you can see it. Right here, when the two pine cones are kissing noses, and the bottom right in red, you see how this wave here, if I could stop it, and it's right there. So this wave here, the red wave on top, as it reaches where the pine cones kiss noses in the center, the one wave is going one way, and it has to meet the other pine cone going in the opposite direction, 180 degrees out of phase. You might call that getting screwed. But it actually means the way two screws cross. And the way they would meet perfectly is that, and when that happens, it would create a longitudinal wave. And longitudinal waves would enable you to make a flame with your mind. Now, it turns out that there's very few scientists in the world who know how to make longitudinal waves, sadly. It's sad. But compare that image. Compare the image we were just looking at about pine cones kissing noses. Compare that to what's called four-wave mixing in phase conjugate optics. It's just, if you arrange for lasers to meet like that, it's called a phase conjugate mirror. You know, when Alice was in the looking glass and then she noticed that the milk was not nourishing, because when you're in a mirror, supposing you're living inside a mirror, inside a mirror, the helix is going to go the wrong way, isn't it? Well, it turns out that all living proteins have a helix that goes one way only. It's called enantiomorphism. And if the helix goes the wrong way, then your body cannot absorb it. NutraSweet, I think, is an example of a helix that went the wrong way, and so your body doesn't absorb it. Well, when Alice was in the looking glass, she says, "This milk, it's not nourishing." Guess what? She was in a phase conjugate mirror. She was in the mirror, and the helix was going the wrong way, up the down staircase. And when the helix goes the wrong way, biology, it cannot absorb that energy. And in physics, this is called a phase conjugate mirror. And when light bounces off a phase conjugate mirror, does anybody know? I will give you a clue. When my friend Bob Zawada, he taught phase conjugate optics, and when you called him on the telephone, his answering machine says, "Please leave a message, and I will phase conjugate back to you in the near past." Because in phase conjugate optics, they call it time reversal. They call it time reversal when they teach it in a physics class. What they mean is that the waves return to a previous state of greater order. I repeat, the wave returns to a previous state of greater order. Now, why would that be important to you? Well, there's another friend of ours, both Bill and I work with him. His name is Guy Obolensky. Guy Obolensky in Sloatsburg, New York. And he is perhaps one of the world's living experts on Tesla, maybe also Bill. And sure enough, Guy Obolensky built a device to phase conjugate electric fields, and you can pay him and go over there and get inside in order to phase conjugate back to the near past. I mean, in order to get younger. Oh yeah, you can buy it. It's a fountain of youth. It's real. It's possible. Yes, you can reverse aging. Absolutely. It's been done in physics a long time. In physics, the way they proved it, if a bar of steel gets rusty, you can de-rust the steel by taking it back to the past. Ain't it cool? Now, there's one little complication here. As you're making your plans to get younger, I need to tell you there's a caveat, there's a condition. There's always condition, isn't there? It couldn't have been that good, right? The condition is that you can only go back to a past where it is a state of greater order. You cannot return to disorder. That's going to be my new bumper sticker, I think. I'll put that right here. You cannot return to disorder. You know, a messy house can't return to disorder. No. I mean, I want to go backwards in time. You can't return to disorder. I want to return to my youth. Well, if your body was in a disordered state. Now, why can you only go do time travel to the past if you are returning to a state of greater order? I will tell you that's physics for sure. And I will tell you it has everything to do with the flame in the mind. You know what the real fountain of youth is? Guess what it is? It's a flame in the mind. Yeah. Now, we could do the conversation about the biomechanics of Kundalini. Maybe we'll save that one for the moment. The conversation I want to do at the moment about this flame in the mind is regarding the science of alchemy. Now, you all know that we explained that the term alchemy means access to a black hole, which means non-destructive collapse. So when the mercury thin film is on the philosopher's stone and it's turning to gold, what's happening to the nucleus of mercury to change it to gold? It's plasma fusion. It's a charge collapse. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's possible to predict very accurately the frequencies and temperatures at which you can make all of these atoms transmute into their mirror, into their next element in the atomic table. The real physics of alchemy is teachable once you understand the flame in the mind. Now, my purpose here today is not to claim to do new physics, although we can. We clearly can do new physics. We have a dozen, within our own grasp, at least a dozen technologies. And Bill is going to show you pictures today where we understand the electrical engineering of a dozen or more different zero-point energy sources. Actually, from an electrical engineering standpoint, doing the hardware to make the zero-point energy is the easy part. Really, it's the easy part. You know what the hard part is? The hard part is the education so that we can use this in a self-empowered way. Because only if we understand the principle behind it can we use it without it destroying us. So our job is to understand plasma fusion in a way that teaches us the principle. Otherwise, we will be disempowered. Practical example, the famous Joe cell and to some extent the Brown's gas. We now know that the hydrogen atom for the hydrolysis, which is the center of the Joe cell and Brown's gas, I wrote the equation to prove that the radius of hydrogen equals Planck length times exact multiples of golden ratio. That was not known until I wrote the new equation, goldenmean.info/golden proof. Now, that means that the hydrogen atom arrangement of electron shells is exactly this. This is literally a model of the radii, dodeca, ecosa, dodeca, golden ratio, golden ratio, golden ratio. This is how hydrogen works. This is how the sun's heart works. This is the geometry of carbon fusion. Oh, and did you know that the center bond of every rung on the ladder of DNA is hydrogen? So what's going down the zipper of your DNA when you unzip and zip up your DNA, the center? Hydrogen. Guess what the catalyst for the carbon powder fusion is? Hydrogen. Guess what the geometry of hydrogen is? Pure, implosive, three-dimensional fractal fusion geometry. So the fusion in the center of the sun is similar to the fusion in the center of your DNA. Now, there's another story that goes with this. And this story is called Fusion in the Blood. And for this also, I want to acknowledge my friend Bill Donovan, who is speaking next. We know that inside your body, atoms are being transmuted. It has been proven. The famous French chemist, biologist, Louis Kevron, showed the
Well, that was strange. My computer just crashed.
Strange love. Strange love. Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. Yeah, I thought you crashed, baby. I thought you crashed, baby. Yeah, because everything went well.
And I can't hear a thing. So we're just gonna have to cut this one short and retry again on the next one. Thank you all for tuning in.